I really welcome Brian Lightman, General Secretary of ASCL. Brian became the General Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders on the 1st of September, and he served as President of the Association 2007-2008, and he's Honorary Treasurer for the same association 2003 to 2006, so he has a good grasp on resources. President of SHA Wales, now he's going to have to explain these acronyms to me as well. Branch Secretary for the Council member in 1998. Brian has also been a head teacher of St. Cyrus School, would that be right? A large mixed 11 to 18-year-old comprehensive in Wales, in the Vale of Glamorgan, sorry, from 1999 to 2010, and he's taught at modern foreign languages for 16 years in 3 comprehensive schools in the southeast of England, so geographically well informed as well. Brian's broad experience within the English and Welsh education system also includes extensive representation on UK and Welsh Assembly government committees, being an external examiner and an Estian inspector. And thank you very much, Brian, for speaking today.
Okay, thanks very much. SHA is what ASCL used to be called. That's the Secondary Nets Association, which is what we were before we changed our name a few years ago. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak at this event, and thanks for that introduction. What I'd really like to just sort of argue over the next few minutes will be that whilst I think the recommendations of this task force address key issues which need to be tackled, there's absolutely no question about that. The fact of the matter is that what we're talking about here is deep-seated cultural issues which go way back into our education service, indeed as society as a whole. And to solve those, I think we can talk about those specific actions, but I think we need to look a lot further than those specific things in order to really crack them. So just a bit of a thought about where we really are at present in terms of achieving equality in education. You might want to start thinking about that with the latest OECD report. You'll know that we hear a lot about international comparisons between education systems in the world, and Education at a Glance is a report that looks at the different education systems across the world and compares them. The latest report came out on September the 11th of this year, and it said the socio-economic composition of UK schools poses significant challenges to disadvantaged students, as well as students with an immigrant background. 80% of students with an immigrant background attend schools with a high percentage of immigrant students. Even immigrant students with highly educated mothers are more than twice as likely to be in disadvantaged schools as non-immigrant students. Now, you could be saying the same thing about other disadvantaged groups as well. And one of the major issues that we've really got to challenge is the level of stratification that exists within our society. And I say that as General Secretary of an association which represents the majority of secondary schools in the country, including independent schools, academies, maintained schools, free schools, the whole lot, schools in deprived areas, everywhere else. And certainly when I think about some of the schools I've visited this year, you just really see those differences when you travel the country. So if there is to be any substance between the stated aims of government, which are strongly supported by school leaders to create a world-class education system, then it goes without saying that we've got to focus on every single child, and we've got to see schools and teachers as the solution rather than part of the problem. And I say that from the heart because it's very easy for the public to read some of the sensationalist reports, and I've got to get this dig in, such as the one you saw last Sunday, that appalling story where the GCSE proposals were leaked, and we heard about the end to dumbing down and all the terrible things in our education system, which reflects a deeply damaging and toxic culture. Instead of actually saying these are really serious issues that we need to work together to solve, then you end up with what Stephen Ball at the Institute of Education in London called a culture of derision, which just denigrates our education system. So how do we do everything to ensure that all young people, whatever their background, have an opportunity to complete their education in an environment which fosters and supports high aspirations and doesn't end up perpetuating patterns of disadvantage or setting pupils up to fail. Well, we as school and college leaders are absolutely committed to addressing those challenges. And while we're the last to deny that there's so much more to do, we need to remember as well that we are making progress. It's very easy to be all gloom and doom and be depressed about these things, but that same OECD report does also say the educational opportunities to people from poorly educated families are limited in most countries, but the UK does better than other countries in moving people up the social ladder. Some 41% of 25 to 34-year-olds in the UK have attained a higher level of education than their parents, compared with an OECD average of 37%. Well, it's not good enough. We need to do a lot more. But we just need to bear in mind, because you sometimes don't hear that when you listen to the news or you read some of the papers. So contrary to some populist views, I think it would be ridiculous to deny that there's been improvement in many of our schools in terms of attainment, behaviour and achievement. And whatever might be wrong, right or wrong about GCSE, for example, the same OECD report demonstrates the difference in terms of employability that comes alongside the possession of those 5 good GCSEs. But Rome wasn't built in a day. So what are schools doing? Well, the difference now from when I started teaching a very long time ago is that schools now make sophisticated use of data to monitor the progress of all pupils. Every school I go into, you'll find a thing on the wall of the head's office with the progress of every single pupil mapped out in traffic lights, you know, looking where they're doing well, where they're not doing so well, what the issues are. And they identify relative areas of weakness, and they implement appropriate targeted interventions in a completely different league from where it was in the past. Now, those sophisticated systems, and I'm not saying they're perfect in every school, there's a lot of work to be done, there are many schools that are behind others, but there are lots who are at the forefront. They've been supported by a whole range of activities, such as the London Challenge, and they have made a significant difference, particularly in those schools with the highest numbers of disadvantaged children. And my contention would be that whilst part of that analysis is about looking at the relative performance of different groups, and that's really important that we look at the background of the children, we look at where they come from and everything else, the key thing is about individual achievement. And don't we spend a lot of time these days talking about institutional achievement and accountability of the schools, rather than actually saying, why isn't that child doing as well as they could, and what can we do to help that child, whether that child is from an ethnic background or from a traveller background or whatever. And that's, I think, the key to equal opportunities. That's where you start to make a difference, because you don't allow the background of any child to be an excuse for underachievement. You say, right, we've got to do something about it, and the strategies that we put in place have to be appropriate for that particular child. So we spend too much time looking through the lens of the accountability framework, and I think that can mask a lot of inequalities. In fact, I'm absolutely sure it can. And those global figures mask all kinds of inequalities, and that's why we need to look at the individual child. And I think actually, just really picking up on some of the points Andrew was making about exclusions, the key to this then is that you then look at that child. Why aren't they behaving? Why aren't they achieving? What are the strategies we need in place to actually make sure that that child has an appropriate curriculum? So in terms of the social mobility strategy, and this is a policy which ASCL warmly welcomed when it came in, and we're undertaking a major research project on that at the moment to identify and share the best practice. And it's about those sorts of interventions that go on in schools. And we're going to be publishing later this year guidance to schools, case studies, and a paper for government and policymakers about the kinds of strategies that work best. It's a policy we warmly welcome, but just a word warning, it is far too early to be able to talk about impact. You know, it's only just come into place, and people have got to be patient, and it's, you know, this is not something that was solved overnight. So let me finish really with 3 key areas which I think school and college leaders know will make the biggest difference in terms of equalities. The first one is the curriculum. A curriculum which is appropriately differentiated for the needs of every child. That doesn't mean one that's watered down. It doesn't mean one that focuses to the exclusion of everything else on academic study either. It means a balanced curriculum, a broad and balanced curriculum. And there are major problems, I think, at the moment in terms of the direction of travel of curriculum and qualifications, which are at serious risk of widening rather than narrowing gaps. Instead of talking about examinations all the time, we should be talking about what young people in the 21st century need to know and what they need to understand, and what will best prepare them to be effective adults who can make a real contribution to our multicultural society and our economy. The curriculum needs to give them the key to the door to employment, whether through traditional sixth form study in school, further education, apprenticeships or graduate entry. Secondly, we need to do far more to improve access to high quality career routes for all young people. Employer involvement is an absolute key, as is access to higher education, even for those who think they can't afford it or come from debt-averse backgrounds. We have to provide high-quality careers education and guidance for young people. So, those are really important things. And by the way, we continue to believe that the exclusion of face-to-face guidance from the new careers regulations was a major mistake in terms of coalition government policy, which could easily be reversed. It could easily be reversed with a minimal investment, which we would contend the government can't afford not to make. Really serious issue there. There are too many young people who are not getting access to the right sort of impartial guidance that actually helps them to raise aspirations. And then thirdly, rather than being obsessed with structures, school choice and competition, driving so-called weaker schools into a spiral of attrition, we need to be helping every school to develop the capacity to adopt the best practice in the interests of every single child. It comes back to that quote I gave you at the beginning from the OECD there. We don't want to be having schools where all the disadvantaged pupils end up. What we need to be doing is making sure that every school is as good as it possibly can be and works in the interests of every child. So I absolutely agree about teacher training and about high quality CPD, which is a spectrum, and it starts from initial teacher training, it goes throughout their career, and it's got to be planned for experienced teachers and school leaders as everybody else. So that is absolutely crucial, and that's a most important aspect of this. So there's a lot there, but I hope that gives you a feel for how we feel as school and college leaders. Thanks very much.